Greetings to our friends and colleagues for part 3 of our series East-West Digital Virtual Synchronization regarding global reach power. Today, our discussion is on the East and what can be best termed as natural theology. In that context, I'm going to introduce to you today Mr. John Alton, who will self-introduce himself. I think that's the best way to do this, but just bear in mind, John and I have known each other and been good friends, professional, and have for over 25 years. We've traveled to China together. John is truly a master of Qi and has taken years of effort and continues that effort in the clinical and research of the topic that you're going to hear today. So John, thank you very much for doing this. Welcome. And if you could share with us here on the first slide an introduction. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Phil. To the left of the screen there, you've got a picture of the latest book that I've written, which details my history in there. But I'll give you a thumbnail sketch. I began my adult life as a college professor of English and used that to get over to China. I'd had a sort of amateur interest in martial arts, but I'd gotten up fairly high on the US side. And I was very interested in the origin of the martial arts, and particularly acupuncture, Chinese medicine, but I was a bit naive. I didn't know as much as I thought I knew when I got over there. This was 1987, and I was there for 2 years and was introduced to a level of Qi that is truly remarkable, and I don't think the like has ever been able to be experienced by a Westerner, because if you recall that period of time from 1987 to 89, that was the period of unrest that led to the Tiananmen Square issue, riot, if you want to call it. I don't, it was a revolution, literally. And as a result of that, the Chinese government became very nervous about any sort of crowd building and anything that was just off of party stuff. So they shut down the way in which Qi was taught through the practice called Qigong, and have been very careful about how they've talked about it even now. So I was there at an opportune moment, that's what I'm trying to say, and learned quite a lot, came back, taught in a studio, which is Phil and I crossed paths during that period of time, and I published one book, which brought Phil to me, that led to a second book, which got me to the University of Virginia's Medical Research Division of Alternative Medicine, where I found a little home for about 15 years or so, and conducted some pretty, I'm pretty proud of it, research on the practice that I had learned over there, and came up with data that to show that it has a profound and distinguishing effect on the body. And you don't really necessarily have to talk about Qi to even get to that. However, that's what we are going to talk about today, because Western science has been very standoffish about the whole issue of Qi. It can't be measured in traditional scientific ways, so it's been muted, as it were. But now there have been some breakthroughs in science that are allowing us to talk about it again, which is where we're coming with this, that allows us to really understand the ancient natural theology of China and the whole East.
Thanks, John. And in that context now, what are the fundamentals? If you could take us through that, the fundamentals, the historical 5 texts, as they're called. If you could give us some background on that, please. Thank you.
All right, let me see if I can advance the slide. There we go. So there are 5 fundamental texts. They are Taoist, and I've got them arranged in chronological order here. And the first one has kind of an odd name. It's the Hetu Liu Shu. Hetu means a river map. Lo is just a place, I think it's the name of a river. Shu is book. And out of that came these ancient squares from which the Bagua was developed. You can see the yin yang symbols surrounded by 8 trigrams. And then you have the Chinese above it. The first one is Hatu, that's the river map. The second one is the square, rather. And then the second square there is the Lo Shu. And if you look carefully at these diagrams, they're essentially binary code. And they describe natural relationships, which the Bagua is supposed to represent. And the Bagua that goes with the first square is known as basically the Bagua before you were born or before birth. And the one that goes with the second square is the one that applies to afterbirth. And you can see that if you look at the trigrams around each of the Baguas, you'll see they're different. And that's a topic that gets developed in great detail in the second book, I Ching, the Book of Changes. And both of these authors are mythical. There's no proof that they exist. And if you read the stories about them, they are beyond anything that you would read in the Iliad and the Odyssey. So they're mythic. But in the I Ching, you end up with what captured the imagination of Leibniz when he encountered this, and he saw in it, if you look at that square with the 8 times 8 equals 64, the hexagrams, that captured his imagination and made him believe that the Chinese were onto a mathematical path that indicated to him some sort of enlightened state of mind, and therefore worthy of engagement with the West. And Leibniz was ignored and probably sabotaged. But you can see the two Baguas, which are developed from the Hatu Lo Shu. And the first one is called Early Heaven, that corresponds to the primal, the before birth Bagua. And then there's later heaven, which is essentially the changing conditions of nature that we live in, the modern times. And so by connecting the ancient past perfect one with the future, or in present rather, and future changing one, it is possible to determine structures and situations that you can possibly anticipate. So that's the nature of those two books. Very mysterious stuff. Well, let's move on to the next three. Chronologically, they're a bit, those are the oldest. These are a little bit younger. The Yellow Emperor's Book of Internal Medicine. Very important. This is where acupuncture came from, and the very important 5-element theory of fire, earth, metal, water, and wood, and even an entire political science actually grew out of the Wuxing, as it's called, the 5 elements. And then acupuncture is derived in many ways from that. There's an entire way of looking at acupuncture from the 5 elements as well. But all of that involves qi, and that's what we're building toward right now, is a description of qi. And then you have the Shennong's Materia Medicae, which is a translation of the Chinese, and Shennong, again, a mythological character, as was the Yellow Emperor. No one can prove that they exist, but there it is, this massive compendium of herbs and how to use them based on the 5 elements, based on the Taiji Tu, which is the yin yang symbol in qi. Then finally we come to the most recent book, which is still pretty old, by Lao Tzu, the Tao Te Ching. There's some evidence that Lao Tzu existed. Translated, the Tao Te Ching is the book of the virtuous way, would be one way to translate it. And the central message of that is that goodness equals harmonization with nature. So all of these are natural theological texts. And when you get into this book, this is where the West, I think, has primarily encountered the yin yang. The technical name for it is the Taiji Tu. And the Taiji is the line that separates the dark and light shapes, which is a border between the two. And you can sort of think of them as material and spiritual. That's one way to think of it, darkness, light. There are many dualities that you can line up to put in these two categories. But I like to think of that line separating it as the line that separates the spiritual from the material. which is chi. I would argue that that line is chi. So when one experiences chi, one is actually getting at and experiencing that very important line separating yin yang.
Thanks, John. So you brought up Leibniz already. So let me just think back and have you talk about, in the context of what does the West understand in the Tao? This Leibniz and Newton, we're talking 300 years ago. And that brought on the Newtonian-based Enlightenment. So when that happened, clearly we felt we understood in the West, but clearly there's a lot we did not understand and that we've missed. So if you could please review that with us, I'd appreciate it.
Yes, and I have to thank Phil for really being my teacher in this area. He's the one that brought this to my attention. Now, I've been a little bit of a student of Newton, and I know quite a bit about him historically, and I always kind of put him on a pedestal. Now, I don't so much do that. I see Newton as actually having made a grave mistake, and not necessarily him, but followers of Newton have really taken his approach to the extreme, which I would say is material. So the West got wrapped around the axle of what we could prove in material science, thanks largely to the success of Newton. Leibniz went off, in my opinion, went off in a more energetic direction, and he wanted to understand spirit through mathematics, and he was essentially shut down. He was canceled. And that's a story in and of itself. I'm not really sure, but we have not, I mean, our way of looking at the East has just been that they are still kind of stuck in a mumbo jumbo voodoo kind of mindset, and that the only reason their traditional medicine works, and this idea has been, I'd say it's still pretty strong. It's weakening. But when Phil and I were first trying to establish an East-West connection between medical institutions in the West and the East, we were running into this kind of hard material science. Well, you can't prove that she exists, and it's probably all placebo effect. That's generally the West's answer to anything that you can't prove materially. So as a result, we missed a lot of that. What we come up with, what can be said objectively, is that we understand that they had, the East have a natural theology that's informed at the very base by Taoism, and that Confucianism and Buddhism came along and kind of augmented and in many ways strongly influenced the changing of the way that it was interpreted. And it dominated in China, and it also dominated all the other East Asian cultures surrounding China, including Japan until World War II. And we conquered Japan. They submitted, at least superficially, to the West. And then China was taken over from within by the communists, and they went full bore into Stalinist Western, they appeared to anyway, to go into a full bore kind of Westernization. They had the 4 modernizations. That was a big driver of early China after the communist takeover. Now, what we are now finding out is that the Communist Party, in the past 5 or 6 years, has been promoting in the party school, in their educational programs, the 5 foundational texts that I just referenced, which is odd. I think that took a lot of the people in the know, people like Phil, took them by surprise, and as a result, just we don't really know, and so people are kind of scrambling to figure out what's up with that. And we also know that Japan, and I would include Taiwan, Korea, Indochina in general, and India, in spite of the Westernizing influence that we've had, that Newtonian Western material science has had, and even political ideas have had on those nations and on those cultures, they've maintained key aspects of their natural theology. So the Japanese have an emperor, their health systems, they've maintained they've westernized, and they've gotten Western antibiotics and Western procedures and so on, but they've also maintained their natural medicine. There's a great deal of sentiment among the people to the locale where they were born, and allegiance to those spots. When you meet someone in China, very often one of the polite things to ask is, where's your hometown? What hometown are you from? If you meet them in the city. And Chinese are always surprised when I'm able to ask them that question, because that's just considered polite. And all of this has happened even as these nation states, cultures were adopting Western technology and vestiges of appearance. Now, what they've missed, what we've missed rather, is that Taoist Qi, and I would include with that Hindu prana, the concept of prana, is the basis of these books, the philosophies, and that we're looking at. We might be tending to look at it as kind of empty. Maybe they're just trying to use religion as a fallback way to organize people, but it's much deeper than that, because humans can sense and manage Qi through sensory practice. It's not an idea. The only thing that the West has that comes close to that is Aristotle's ether. And that was quashed during the Enlightenment. That was thrown out completely. The idea of ether, because you couldn't prove it. And Newton's ideas came in and drove Aristotle out along with the church. Now with quantum theory, it's possible to go back and revisit these ancient concepts, and they appear to have something going on here. Another point is that I think we missed, and this was pointed out to a colleague that Phil and I are working with, is that the East sensibilities tend to work in an a priori fashion. They already have an ideal, as it were, understanding of how things are supposed to work. So whenever they get an example in reality, they kind of match it up to the ideal, and if it doesn't fit, they're able to critique what's missing. Kind of like the old Bagua and the younger Bagua. But the West, what we do is inductive, and I would call it a posteriori. The deductive approach is a priori. This is at Latin terms, and then the inductive is a posteriori, where we gather data and we accumulate little bits of data, and then we get a picture from that, and we then make a theory based on what we've accumulated through the data. That's a scientific method. So those things tend to really have a huge effect on our understanding of how the Chinese mind works, how the East Asian mind works, and even how I would say the East Indian mind works. So that needs to be understood to begin with. Now, another point, and this is again something that a little nub of information that I've made quite a big deal out of, is that during the Long March, and this is recorded in a book called Qigong Fever by a man named David Palmer. I would encourage people to look at it if you're curious. Mao Zedong and a bunch of his cadres when they were up in the mountains of the Shanxi wilderness, they were hurt, they were banged up from fighting the Kuomintang, and then a group of villagers came and visited the cadres. I don't think they visited Mao particularly, but they visited some of his higher level cadres and healed them using Qi healing methods. They didn't have a name for it. They just said this is the ancient stuff, and it involved putting Qi on people, and it also involved movement, having them teaching the person to do exercises as a way to self-maintain. In my opinion, this was the starting point of when the communists decided to institutionalize a study of Qi. And they put it into three major institutions. They put it into the sports university, into the medical universities, and into science and engineering. And they began to explore it. Now, here's another little favorite idea of mine. Again, I'm one of the few people that probably believes this, but around the time that, well, we know that when the communists took over in China, the Soviets came in, as they always did. And I believe that the Chinese showed them some chi stuff that they were able to, they had gathered some experts by this point and were able to demonstrate extraordinary abilities from these chi practitioners. And the Soviets promptly went back and began to study it. And they used a Western scientific approach, and they produced what is now the current approach to that the Chinese are actually using to develop a scientific approach to chi. And the popular term, originally it was scalar energy. And that is a term that came out of Tesla, Nikola Tesla, and now it's called torsion energy, which is based on spin-spin dynamics in particles. That creates a force. It is scalar because it only has magnitude. It has no direction. It just goes out. And the only thing that separates our ability to even measure it is magnitude, the intensity of the energy that's put out. And I think the Chinese, along with all the other East Asian countries, have taken this knowledge and they've begun to develop a chi torsion energy or torsion field science, and they've been doing this for the past 50 years. I think that's enough there.
Okay. So John, now in the context of science and understanding this, let's talk about the physiology of natural theology, please.
All right. See if I can. My slides are not advancing here for some reason. Let's see if this will work. Okay. All right. So, as I said, I think they've been at it for 50 years. And this is kind of a summary of what I've been able to learn from reading through the literature on it. So the basis of this approach to chi or torsion energy is that all material substances in the universe produce chi or torsion energy or torsion fields that are caused by multiple particle spins. So you have electrons, you have nuclei, you have molecules, all the way up to substances, to objects that are producing very complex energy fields that can't really be measured, not by traditional, they're off this is not on the electromagnetic spectrum. So that's inert matter. When you get to living organisms, they tend to produce the most complicated torsion energy, chi, torsion field phenomena, with humans producing the most complex fields. The structure of these chi torsion energy fields are vortical. They're vortexes, which is fascinating to me. In the martial arts, the spin and the circle are always there, and they're used quite a bit in actual martial art, and in Qigong, very, very important. So the polarized spinning of particles, so that they're kind of moving in the same way, that will create an attractive force, and the non-polarized or spinning in opposite directions will create a repulsive force. That's one of the things they've discovered. Humans, they've discovered, are the greatest generators and receivers of torsion energy fields, or chi. Water absorbs and wind disperses chi torsion energy. That's the basis of the Chinese art of feng shui. I guess we'd call it an artistic science. It appears to be an actual science, always written off as just some kind of airy-fairy thing, but appears to have some basis. And Chinese and Pan-East Asia in general are focused on 3 chi torsion energy field aspects: collecting it, and you can collect it through water. Water tends to absorb this energy and hold it. Crystals do as well. Managing the energy itself, which you can do through shapes, so you can direct energy through. They found that anything approximating a cone, a spiral, which a spiral does, it starts at the narrow end and it widens like that. Triangles, which again would kind of get us into thinking about why are temples, ancient temples, why were they structured the way that they were structured? Why are the pyramids? Why did the Mayans use pyramids? Why did the Egyptians use pyramids? All kinds of questions. Why do we look at the Hindu, and we look at Russian Orthodox, we look at Catholic? They have these conical hats that they put on. Actually, the Orthodox have these conical hats that have like the open big circle at the top. The patriarchs do. So anyway, they found that shapes literally affect these torsion fields. And this gets you into feng shui, where you can use water and shapes to create a positive chi flow in an environment. And then generating it. How do you generate chi when you need chi? It turns out that humans, as I say, are the best generators of chi that we have. So that makes me think that perhaps the Chinese went on a genetic hunt to locate people that were particularly good at this. It makes complete sense that they would do this if it's true. And also technology, those are the two directions that they're going in, and they're developing machines that can produce it, and then developing human beings that are really good at it.
So John, in this context of chi, really it boils down in my mind to awareness, knowledge, and connection. If you could just address that, and then let's get into how do we possibly synchronize all of this. Thank you.
Okay. So the tech, all right, yeah. So here we are. So the technology is there, and I'm going to talk about that. So did I skip a slide here?
No, you're good. The
Okay,
slide
good.
you were on is good.
Okay. So this has to do with the work that I've done in my company, which has evolved over the years. And what we've done is we've looked at measurable physiological aspects of the body that can be affected by these East Asian practices known as Qigong. And what I was able to do over the years is just kind of connect the dots. So if you look at the changes that we were able to record in people who went from having no chi ability to ability to sense chi and to actually feel the chi inside of what the Chinese would call feel the chi inside the body, you come to the conclusion that it's the autonomic nervous system, that there is some aspect, and I would refine that even further and just say the cardiovascular, autonomic, and immune system. Those work together. Those are compartmentalized, broken apart Western ideas of a holistic system that the practices can actually put you in touch with, and we can make measurements out of and demonstrate that it's there. So it's related to what we already know, in that we know that basic exercise makes you healthy. And so I would include cardiovascular exercise sort of as a foundation of that. If you look at how it works, you can see that it jacks up the autonomic nervous system. It works with the autonomic nervous system, activates it, use it or lose it. And that's the way that works. The only problem with it is that eventually your joints and so on wear out, and you lose your ability to generate those positive effects from that kind of movement, that kind of ability, which takes you to the second level, where the mind becomes more involved with this cardiovascular, immune, autonomic process that we were able to identify in our research. And I think you can show that by breathing deeply and by focusing your mind and blocking certain thoughts and allowing a more positive mindset to settle into a person, that they can achieve healthy measurements of the cardiovascular, autonomic cardiovascular immune system. And when you get to this third level, which is where my system, what I teach and what the Qigong that I teach allows, you have a high sensory communication. That is, your mind is literally down inside and controlling the cardiovascular immune system. You're able to literally focus it where you need to focus it. Now, research that the East Asians have done is suggested to me that this cardiovascular ability that happens at level 3 gets you to a fourth level, where you literally get into what we can't measure, where we're into the what I would just call, for lack of a better term, paranormal or the extra dimensional. And this has always been written off as just sort of crazy behavior. And in China, they have phenomena where people have just had to be institutionalized because of these practices. So they have a saying for it. So that's what, it's a fine line when you get to this area. Are there real things going on here, or is it imaginary? Is it crazy, or is it real? And we have plenty of evidence to suggest that paranormal abilities are possible in human beings. And it may be that it may be a cardio harmonic that allows a person through these Chinese practices to achieve that higher level of qi, where you can begin to do extraordinary things, not just for yourself, but perhaps for a nation state or for a culture.
So taking all this into account, John, what do you feel is a possible route of synchronization of East and West?
Well, just real quick, this is where I think the future is going here. My company right now is using a torsion energy machine to identify torsion fields put out by humans while we're reading them simultaneously with a radar device that can pick up vital signs. So we want to see the vital signs that correlate with the torsion energy we're able to see. And it may provide us an east-west way of looking holistically at human beings and health and lots of issues. Not just getting, into how long you live or whatever, but into even states of mind, which clearly are related to health. But the final questions that the West, I think, needs to ask itself based on all of this is, to what degrees have Eastern powers, and I would say especially the CPC, Chinese, the Communist Party of China, exploited this ancient knowledge contained in things like the I Ching and the Hetu Shu for local and global politico-environmental management. That's a really important question to ask. How have Eastern powers similarly exploited knowledge of qi and prana? I would use those terms interchangeably in terms of the development of what the Russians came up with. How far have they gone with that? These are questions that need to be looked at, answered, probed. And to what extent have Eastern powers, especially the CPC, combined digital with qi and torsion energy fields knowledge, especially in terms of biotech? Now, this is where it really gets creepy. It is possible to grow an entire brain now through Western science. Our biotechnology has allowed us to do this, and which opens up the possibility for cyborg technology, combining digital technology with organic human beings, and even creating brains, as it were, that could be used to collect and to transmit qi. And you could also have choirs of living human beings that are really good at managing qi, and they could be doing things with that. These questions need to be asked. And then, to what extent are Eastern powers, especially CPC, using digitized qi, torsion energy fields knowledge, and biotech to influence us and the rest of the world? And here's one that gets way out there in creepy land, and that is, have Eastern powers, especially the CPC, use qi and torsion energy field technology or knowledge to penetrate to the paranormal extra-dimensional level? And how, if they've done that, how will that penetration affect global international affairs? Could they be doing that? Could they be using that to affect global politics? And then, as is the big theme in this presentation, is the digital paradigm causes civilizations to retrieve and individuals to retrieve ancient memory. How will the digital paradigm shift affect this aspect of the East, the qi, torsion energy field, and how will that contribute to an increasingly Eastern aversion to the West as they become, as we put up resistance to it? how that will affect them when they embrace it. That may make them increasingly averse to us and vice versa, which then can lead to disharmony. And I think the bigger question now for harmony is that will Western discoveries and uses of chi, torch, and energy fields contribute to a harmonization or an attraction to the East, which is right now missing. And I would argue that that's the way to go.
Well, John, thank you. And so now we think of this ascendant East, and we have the current challenge going on in Eastern Europe, but in the background of that really is a new and special growing relationship between Russia and China. So brought in the context of what you presented to us today, it gives us a lot to think about. And so if there's any final thought or word, John, if you could share it, but we really appreciate what you've enlightened us on. Thank you.
Yeah, getting back to what you were saying, I think it's very important to look at the Russian-Chinese relationship. And as you pointed out to me, there's an ancient history there. And as our colleague, Alex, and everyone will be getting to meet, mentioned to us, the Chinese translation for Eastern Orthodox Church is the true Christianity, the true, the real, Junda. So that kind of gives us an idea about how the Chinese historically may be thinking about Christianity. And the Eastern Church is quite mystical compared to the Western Church. And there's just more possibility for harmonization there, I think, than with the Western Church, which tends to be very logical and Newtonian. And I think the Western Church can catch up to this and should try to catch up to this by interfacing with the Eastern Church on that level and be a little bit more open to these possibilities that actual science is starting to show is real.
Well, thank you, John. And so in our next session 4, we'll be taking a look at the concept itself of the China operating system. But John, appreciate very much what you've shared with us today, and thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.